welcome back to Hunter Tune. Today we're going to be dyno tuning this, I think it's an EM1 Civic. It was painted like Adam LZ cream color, and it has a little built-up all-motor B-Series in it, and hopefully we can make some jam with it today. This car came in running and driving fairly well. We just wanted to do some touch-ups on it and get it ripping, convert it over to E85, and give it a good dyno tune. So first thing I did when this car came in is I actually had to put it up on the hoist because it did not have an accessible O2 bung in the exhaust. It did have an O2 bung on the header, but it was not drilled out far enough, so the sensor, when I would go to put it in, it would not actually go down far enough to be able to actually thread. It was like they didn't drill the hole big enough when they put the O2 bung in. I drilled the exhaust and welded on a new O2 bung actually after the header, where all the exhaust gas collects into one pipe, because the one on the header, that was another thing, is the one on the header was only two of the exhaust runners and not the other, because this is like a 4-2-1 style header on this thing. It is an LSVtec B18A bottom end with a GSR cylinder head, Skunk 2 Pro Series intake, 70 mil throttle I think, and I just swapped in some Hunter tuned normal style truck injectors into this thing. You guys can see right here, nice clean install with the top hats from huntertune.com, and we have the wiring loom protection that I put over the top, soldered all the connections, and yeah, I just chucked a HTS base map on this thing, and it fired right up, running good. And then I proceeded to pull the return line like I always do, hook up my clear hose so I can see the fuel flowing out, and I just drained all the gas that was left in this thing. There's only like 2 gallons left. So I got all the gas drained out of it, went to the gas station, put 6 gallons of E85 in, and then I, proceeded to go into HTS, add like 30 to 50% of fuel on the overall trim on my base map that I had, and got this thing up and running great. So now we're going to run through the tune. This car does have a set of camshafts and some other stuff in the cylinder head. I was told this car has, I forget exactly what camshafts they are, but the downfall to these camshafts currently is they're actually running on the stock cam gears, so we're not going to be able to fine-tune the camshafts for this motor. I do feel like that will greatly help this thing, but we'll see what it'll do on the stock gears. I also do believe that this is a little bit of a high compression bottom end, and it barks. Let me just tell you guys, this thing barks. So we got a good 3-inch cold air intake with just a 45. Usually those are the best performers. Some of the other ones that have a bunch of snaky bends and they put the filter down in the fender well and stuff like that, they actually sometimes hurt power. Hondas really do kind of like just the simple intake just like that for these little all-motor setups. And I actually did start filming some stuff yesterday, but I got frustrated because the dyno quit working on me because the firmware needed to be updated. So down here where it says like status, your dyno is connected right now, it was saying update firmware in like caps lettering. So I had to go to options and firmware upgrade right here, and then it says upgrade to latest firmware online or upgrade firmware using downloaded file. And now it is up to date and everything is working, but it actually wasn't recording runs for me because it, it just was, it needed to upgrade to firmware. I don't know what the fuck, brain fart. Anywho, so I tried for like an hour last night to get the firmware upgraded. I had the hotspot enabled on my cell phone, and I just had the computer hooked up to my hotspot, so I had a good internet connection, and I kept hitting upgrade to latest firmware, and it would just sit here and say status firmware upgrade started, and that's all it would say. And I could not get it to work for the life of me. And I went on the Your Dyno website, and I was just looking for a download that maybe I can just use to implement into the software, and that didn't work. So what ended up working is I came out here this morning and clear head, whatever, because I was working on a bunch of stuff yesterday and I was just kind of scatterbrained at the time. But I came out here with a fresh head, fresh mind, and I hit that upgrade to firmware again. It did the same thing it did last night, and while I tried upgrading it, I just unplugged the dyno and plugged it back in, hit the button, and it worked. So simple fix. you know, some, you know, computers got little glitches and bugs you got to work out sometimes, and that's just what we had to do on that one. But yeah, so we're going to get to tuning on this thing. It is just kind of on a base map right now. And I did just do one little tug with it. It was getting really lean up top, which is just telling me that these cams are going to want a lot of RPM and it's going to want a lot of fuel. Just with the base map, this is just like a stock GSR map. It was walking into the 14s up top, air fuel, with just like that style base map. So that just tells me that this thing is gonna bark and it's gonna want a lot of fuel, and whenever the motor is gonna ask for a lot of fuel, it's usually gonna make a lot of power. So your fuel curve is always gonna follow your power curve usually. So you guys can see this is the initial tug that we did on this thing off camera, and it's kind of all over the damn place. So you can see it is on an uphill climb for sure, and we're already making 178 horsepower right out of the gate. But you can definitely see here where Vtec is engaging, it is going super flat and it's dropping torque like a son of a gun right at the Vtec crossover. So that is telling me that we're gonna have to bump this Vtec up here where the torque is actually starting to level. We're gonna have to move the Vtec, so where it's dipping around 4,500 is where it currently is right now. We're gonna have to move it up here to where the torque is finally on an uphill climb. So anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000, I think we'll be in the money. So once we get that sorted out, another indicator that the Vtec was set too low is on a good base map. Usually if you have a good starting point for fuel, you can watch the wideband, and when it crosses over into Vtec, it just dove rich. So that's also telling me that this camshaft setup with the Vtec point set where it was, it don't got the airflow to be able to require that amount of fuel at that Vtec setting. So that's just another kind of like thing that I look for, and we're just kind of basic, you know, fairly conservative ignition on this E85. I think I got it at 26 degrees, and we're just gonna run through this tune-up and hopefully get it ripping. Another thing I did do on this car is I actually had to weld that O2 bung in like I was saying. I got the sensor installed, and I got these two wires going to the battery that go to my wideband in the car. It's just easier, more responsive to run the wideband into the car and have me actually watch a gauge instead of trying to watch the dyno, because I feel like the dyno wideband, when I have it set up through the dyno, it is a little bit delayed. So watching it through the new X series gauges that I offer on my website definitely works a lot better for me. And whatever works for you guys is what works for you guys. It's just kind of what I prefer and what I've been doing. So now that we have our baseline run all set up, I'm going to get back in the car. We're going to make a few adjustments on the tune and go at it again. I definitely need to add more fuel up in the high end, you know, portion of the run. So we're going to just get started here, guys, and take you along for the ride. Wow, runs like factory with them 100 tuned injectors, let me tell you. And these are the dead times that I'm using on HTS for the normal style Hunter tuned injectors. I'm using the ID 725 at 60 PSI, the 850cc dead times, and let me tell you guys, they're like meant to be. Everything, the map is nice and smooth. There's no, like a lot of times on some stuff when the dead times are off, like your idle is gonna ask for more than, like, you know, like your map is just not gonna be smooth, your fuel map. So if it's got a lot of bumps and, you know, bruises along in the fuel map, that's usually an indicator that the dead times are a little bit off. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just, you know, a lot of people freak out about the dead time stuff, but it's not that big of a deal to me. You just kind of play with dead times until you get everything to smoothen out and work properly. One-handed. You like that? All right, let's give her. So I'm gonna plug my wideband in. Sorry, I'm trying to hold the camera and film and do all this stuff at once. I'm gonna plug the wideband in so we can watch air fuel. Get this thing plugged in. Let it heat up. All right, there we go. So now registering air fuel, we're gonna maybe just give it a couple percent of fuel at idle real quick. Do like 7%. Fuck it. There we go. Look at me go. Look at me go. Alright guys, and Vtec is definitely going to have to be set a little bit higher. So we're going to go into the Vtec settings on the tune here. We're going to go 5500 instead of 4500. And I usually just set the high and low at the same. Yeah. And then we're going to go to our timing, make sure we're pretty safe here. We can start ramping timing in usually above like 3 to 3500, but below say like 3 grand, you do not want to have a lot of timing in. That's usually why these ignition maps are set up the way they are. When you get into it, you're not going to have barely any timing down low, wide open, just because the way ignition timing works is the more RPM you give it, the earlier you can bring in the timing, because everything's just happening a lot faster. Versus when you're at a lower RPM, if you put the ignition in too soon, the RPM just isn't there to soak up that spark knock. So that's why these ignition maps are set up the way they are. Usually on the low cam side of things, I don't usually touch them. I usually only adjust timing on the high cam side of things. But yeah, so honestly, this ignition map is kind of aggressive coming up top here. I might actually pull just a couple degrees out, just to get it to come down to like, I don't know, 24 degrees or so. And this is just to start. We can always add more in later, but let's be real, you're not like trying to fucking burn the world down at 4,000 RPM. There's no sense in stressing on the motor when it's at such a low RPM. When you guys are ripping on these things, you're screaming, you know, 7 to 9,000 RPM, and that's where I usually focus on, you know, getting most potential out of the motor. And it's also the safest place to get the most potential out of the motor as well. Because when it's actually safer to make horsepower at higher RPM than it is at lower RPM. That's why a lot of times like Matt Happel and Sloppy Mechanics and stuff like that, they always say, you know, a small turbo V8 car that makes a lot of power at low RPM, like a supercharged car or something like that, yes, it's very fun, but it's also really stressful on the bottom end of the motor. And I just interpolated all this adjustment that I made, so now it's peaking like 20. We're gonna set our VTEC, so anything below 6,000, we're only running like 23 degrees. I don't think it's gonna make much of a difference. And I'll show you guys these changes. I'm gonna show you guys pulling this ignition timing out. We're gonna actually go over and look at the dyno run after we do these changes and see if it makes a difference or not. If it drops a bunch of power, we'll put this timing back in, but just to be on the safe side, getting the fuel ironed out, I'm keeping the ignition kind of soft. And then on this side, we're just gonna start off at like 26 degrees for the whole run up here, and then if it starts dying off in power, we can trickle it back in. So we'll do a direct value of 26 degrees. And then on the fuel side of things for VTEC, we're going to interpolate the whole wide open section here on the VTEC side. That way we know our fuel is increasing as we run up in RPM. I'm also going to give it a couple percent of fuel overall on the VTEC side because it was lean the previous pull. Alright guys, let's get it. Get this thing up in 4th gear. I've been preferring to do dyno runs in 4th gear just because you get a lot more data in 4th than you do in 3rd. So now we're in 4th gear, cruising. This is all awesome. I kind of ironed this all out yesterday, making sure cruising and everything was A-okay. And we're probably going to start the run at about 3,000 RPM. logger on the dyno, so I just take my wireless keyboard here and I hit the space bar and make sure that the dyno says logging. And then once that's logging, we can floor it and monitor our air fuel. Stop the run on the dyno. And you guys can see there, kind of right where I lifted, it started walking leaner, which just is telling me that these cams are gonna just scream. It's gonna want a lot of RPM, which this is a built bottom end, but it does still have a stock crank pulley on it. And I usually don't like revving the stock crank pulley motors very high. Usually if it has an ATI style dampener, I'm not scared to rev it out as high, or I'm not scared to rev it, you know, rev it higher, but I just, you know, I'm kind of cautious in that sense because I don't like blowing shit up. Alright, so let's go check out our run. Sorry if this video is going to be kind of long, guys. I just really want to run through kind of a whole tune with you guys, and, you know, I think you'll enjoy it. Alright guys, so we did already pick up some power, and we definitely smoothened out a lot of things. So our previous pull on the base map, we made 177 horsepower, 130 foot-pounds of torque. That run right there, just doing the changes that I did, we picked up 5 horsepower and 2 foot-pounds of torque. So let's see kind of the comparison between, oh my, look at that, guys. Look how smooth this curve is now that I changed the Vtec setting, got the fuel in it, and you guys can see that this thing's just on an uphill climb. We're gonna have to keep spinning the motor to make it happy. And then this is the previous run right here, where the Vtec was set really low. I didn't have a whole lot of fuel in it, and I didn't spin it very high. So this is looking a lot more like it. Let's get that fuel in it up top, kind of right where I lifted, around 7,000 RPM or so. I'm gonna wanna add in, I'm gonna start trickling more fuel in it as it's increasing RPM there. We're gonna verify our rev limiter. I already verified the oil in the motor is full. Just little precautions like that I always kind of stress, is just make sure you're not a quart low. You're not, you know, spinning the motor super high when it's low on oil, just because, you know, that's kind of how you hurt stuff. And this is why we run really good quality oil in all our builds. The Schaefer's is really kind of all I run, especially with these high RPM engines. But you can see here that we are increasing our fuel. Let me see here, we'll show you on a 2D. You guys can see here that we are definitely increasing fuel as we are going up, but we are going to have to even make this, we're going to have to make this angle even bigger above 7,500. You could see that the fuel is pretty consistent until it hit higher RPM, which is just telling me that the cams are coming alive and it's just wanting more fuel there. So let's just trickle in some fuel up top and do another run. Let's check our rev limiter out too. Currently the limiter's at 8,200. We're going to bump this up to like 80. We'll do like 88, which is a little high, but I'm not gonna bang on the limiter on this car. I'm just gonna wind it out a little bit higher than I did. So we're just gonna set that kind of high so we don't hit it. Okay, so above like 7,000, I'm gonna trickle in at 7,000 and above. So like right here, I'm gonna do 5%. And then at 7,500 and above, I'm going to do another 5. And then 8,000 and above, I'm going to do another like 2%. And we're going to leave the timing the same. We're not going to touch anything other than that change right there. And our rev limiter is a little bit higher now. So make sure we got that change uploaded. Get this thing to start up. Get her barking, and we are ready to rip, guys. Let's get the wideband up here where we can see it. And I'm going to put the camera down here so I can actually handle, or there. You guys are gonna have to sit like somewhere. I don't know where. It's tough with one camera. just like have something set up. I should get what Brent has and put it on the window of the car. That would help a lot too, but yeah. Right there will work. Wait a minute. Start the run. Sounded so good I stayed in it. And honestly guys, it's still a little lean. It was like 13.0, which isn't bad on an all motor car, but we might even put a little bit more fuel in it. All right, we got the run stopped. Get the wideband unplugged so we don't fucking kill the battery or nothing. Let's see what she did there. Oh, baby. 193 horsepower, guys. We picked up 11 wheel horsepower just by adding a little bit of fuel into the motor and carrying it out a little bit farther. So now we can kind of see where the cams are starting to plateau. And yeah, we can have a pretty safe limiter on this thing of about 8,500, I would think. So I'm going to actually splash in even a little bit more fuel, and I might give it a degree of timing and see if it picks up a little bit more. But I mean, look at that, guys, 11 wheel horsepower just by changing a couple little things. So an 11 horsepower on an all motor car is big, and the curve is getting even smoother than the previous one. This one was still a little bit rocky, not terrible, but this one's looking awesome. Kind of just verify some things, make sure that, you know, everything's still good. We're not pissing oil or coolant or nothing like that. I think we're good to make another rip. I'm gonna put the camera outside the car this time so you guys can hear just how much this motor ripped. Looking even better that run. I added even more fuel in above that 7,500 range where these cams are coming alive. I did have to add even more in up there. And now we're looking at like a consistent in the 12s air fuel. And look at that, guys. We picked up another 3 horsepower. Hopefully we can just continue going up from here. Like I said, this motor, I was told, has been kind of ran for quite a while without a tune, and is definitely not the freshest thing in the world anymore. And it is a little bit noisy. I don't know if you guys can hear in the video, but it is a little bit kind of clattery. I don't know if it maybe needs a little valve lash or something, but it is making good power nonetheless. So we're gonna see here above, like, I added 1 degree of timing as well. So the 1 degree of timing I added overall, and it seemed to respond good above 7,500. So that means I'm going to take the timing from 7,500 and below and pull that degree back out of it, because it did not do any change below 7,500, and above 7,500 is kind of where I'm going to start trickling in maybe another degree and see if it responds well to that. Let the motor cool down for a little while and redo that same run that I just did. The motor might have been a little heat soaked, so it did not respond to that timing, but I'm thinking if could possibly be that the motor is just a little bit heat soaked, because that run right there, we did just add that degree above 7,500. That's the only change I did, and it overlaid literally perfectly, but it did not respond well above 7,500. It actually lost like a half a horsepower. So I'm just gonna let the motor cool off for a little while, and we'll do another run with those same changes and see if it responds well. All right, guys, we're back at it now. Let the car cool off for about 10 minutes or so. And the only other things that I'm doing to this car is I just kind of verified the coolant, because the overflow was leaking a little bit because there's a hole in the can, the monster can that they have as an overflow. So and it was like way overfull. So not worried about head gasket. I feel like because the radiator was still full, they just kind of had coolant in that reservoir, but it was leaking out of there because there's a hole in the can itself. So I just emptied it. I usually have all the overflows on Honda stuff just empty, and then make sure the radiator is completely topped off. That will verify, like, if you're pushing water through the cap into the overflow. It's usually not a good thing. So I'm not going to do any other change other than just letting the car cool off like I did. And I removed the air filter from it, because a lot of these cone style filters, they do actually kind of restrict flow. So if you guys can see, I mean, you can barely see light through that thing. So, I mean, you can see light through it, but the air has to go through all this mesh and all that before it hits the motor. So I'm just going to take the air filter off, maybe point the intake pipe just facing up so it gets some cold, fresh air, and see if this makes any difference. I'm not going to change anything on the tune from the last run. I'm just going to do that. Like I said, cooled the car off, and now removed the air filter from the filter from the intake pipe. Guys, let's see what she did. It was a little bit leaner everywhere, which is telling me that the motor is getting more airflow, which means that it should be making more horsepower. But let's just see. Nope, didn't pick up. It did not pick up. We actually lost another half a horsepower. So maybe I'll just try to trickle in a little bit more fuel. Maybe this motor just wants to be richer. We'll try that quick, and if that doesn't bring our horsepower up at all, I feel like this thing's kind of tapped, and this is where I would probably stop. I'm really surprised that filter didn't pick up power. Well, let's just see here. Let's compare back to back. Okay, so the filter did pick up a small bit. It did. I think it picked up like about a horsepower. Pretty much everywhere. There is a little bit of a gap. You guys can see between green and pink. Pink is the new run and green is the old run for torque. And then the horsepower obviously is just a little bit better. It's not nothing to write home about, but nonetheless, it did do something. Now all I'm doing now is I just added in a couple more percent of fuel, kind of overall, and pulled out that degree of timing that we put in up top, and we'll do another run now. Popcorn mode, holy shit. That bitch pops. 196 horsepower. It's about where we're leaving it, guys. It did not really do much change. I feel like this setup with an adjustable cam gear kit, you know, so we can adjust the cam angles on these cams, I feel like would help a little bit so we can carry this power out and it won't flatline, you know, as fast. It's kind of flatlining right at about 7,500. It's kind of acting like it has a set of stock cams in it. So, I mean, it's asking for fuel up top, but it's not delivering a curve. You know what I'm saying? So, like I said, I'm actually unsure of what cams these even are. So they could be like Type R stock, or they could be some aftermarket deal. But a lot of the aftermarket cams do like to have their set. They like to be degreed. So, but anyways, guys, maybe we'll do one more rip so you guys can hear it out the back of the car, and we'll play with the two-step, get this thing off the dyno, unplug my wideband, and this one's good to go. Very happy with this thing. And like I said, guys, I actually might take it out for a rip on the street really quick and show you what 197 horsepower does on the street. Guys, I'm just taking this thing for a little drive quick for two reasons. I just want to verify that the tune-up is good, you know, on the street. Just kind of make sure everything is good cruising and whatnot. And I also want to show you guys kind of what the, you know, kind of relay the dyno curve and the dyno number to how a car looks and feels on the street. Number fool y'all. It's a little different getting gapped by a car that don't make a number. Fucking mint. Alright guys, so last step of the process now that we're back. We verified everything's good on the street. We had a little fun while we were doing it, and yeah, now we're just going to go into the HTS software. We're going to save this file, and we're going to save it as the customer's name and what car it was. And I try to be kind of descriptive when I save stuff, so when I go back that, you know, when I go back and look through tunes to use as a base or whatever, it's easier to, you know, find something that works. So we're going to save that. I'm going to plug my chip, or my ostrich, back into the laptop here and just verify that the tune that I saved was the one that download. Yeah, we're good. Okay, so now we X out of all that. And then next I take my chip burner. So I just have one of these Motes Burn 2 chip burners with the SST chips. And you put this guy in with the half moon facing towards the handle, and then we plug it into the computer. And then we go to Motes Flash and Burn software. and then we just erase the chip that is, or the tune that is currently on the chip, and then we will go and load the file that we just saved from HTS. And we will program. So once we load that file to the buffer, then we just program the chip, hit close, and we're done. Then we just throw this chip into the ECU and send it down the road. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Hopefully it was informative, helpful, fun, etc. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a great night and a better tomorrow.